From the Sky News Centre, this is Paul Murray Live.
Thank you, Sherry. G'day, everyone. Welcome to Wednesday night. Hey, really important to note that a dear friend of ours here on this program and channel in general, Nicholas Rees, he had the deciding vote in Melbourne Council last night about whether or not to approve the ceasefire motion. He voted against the motion. So I know all of you have a very passionate view of our dear friend, certainly when it comes to the things we disagree with, but when it comes to this one, he did, in my view, the right thing by taking this as not the responsibility of local council. So well done to Nicholas Rees for the casting vote that he cast last night at Melbourne City Council. Now, I've got to be very honest here. I know that the Prime Minister thinks he can do no wrong. I know that his supporters in the media think that the worst of times are behind him. But I've got to say, as a person who obviously did not vote for this Prime Minister, yet still lives under the rule, like we all do, of even the ones we don't vote for, can we stop with the cringy stunts? Now, remember, there was the Labor staffer turned reporter who just happened to have his arm there to be signed by the Prime Minister, who just happened to have a texter when it came to GST and Western Australia. Now, the stunt was fairly obvious, right? We know this bloke can't be trusted. He's broken his word multiple times, so now we're doing stunts to show, hey, please trust me. And then today, rather than turning up in forums where he's actually going to get tough questions, and I get it, politicians, they often turn up on FM radio because it's all about speaking to compulsory voters who just basically want to know whether the Prime Minister is a good person or not. But I've got to say, when the PM doesn't front for serious questions or really is not able to answer serious issues, I kind of cringe that a couple of days after that garbage in Perth, there was this garbage in Sydney.
I'm calling to give you the news, which I reckon is pretty good news, that you have won tickets to Kate's Sweet Seats. You're off to Taylor Swift. Wow, you've got it on Taylor. How good is that? Fantastic. How long have you been trying to get the tickets for?
Like crazy. I've spent probably 50 hours just watching Ticket go round and round. Thank you so much.
Now, again, I get it. There are the people who pay an awful lot of attention, which is why you watch shows like this and as loyal as you are to channels like this, and there is compulsory voter world. But honestly, the cringy stunts, if it's not this, it's the dog, it's you name it, right? Constantly. I saw his opinion about who's going to make the finals and whether there should or shouldn't be expansion in certain sporting clubs. But of course, there are no serious conversations about the reality of what is happening in our country right now. And despite the fact that most of the press gallery, generally speaking, looks the other way or claps him on because they prefer his brand of politics to anyone else. Have you ever seen somebody ask the Prime Minister a question about the reality of his too little too late tax change? The one that he thinks has turned everything around in the polls and apparently is the reason why whenever there's about to be an election, he's going to be pretty at it? I mean, honestly, $15 a week for people on $45,000. $120 a month for people on $100,000. And as you know, this government is all about media distraction, like telling you that you're going to save $1,000 on petrol on a more fuel-efficient car in 2028, on the very same day that they were increasing petrol taxes on any and everyone who needs it for their car, truck, runabout, boat or anything else. Then there's, of course, the scenario of the past couple of weeks where border protection has become a major issue again. Now, I'm not going to pretend that the borders are porous and there's thousands of boats coming our way, but we know the reality of what's happening here, which is once the government turned around and said to the 19,000 people who were on temporary protection visas, after the last 50,000 people who came here via boat, and they've all been made essentially permanent citizens, the message goes up the chain. Look, it'll be uncomfortable, there'll be a bit of a wait, but you'll still end up with the full access to the Australian welfare system. Well, again, very little of this is reflected in the broader media because remember, the narrative of 2023 was that the voice was absolutely going to pass. The reality of what they had to deal with in the final few months of 2023 was that this was a government that was really all over the shop. But then the narrative kicked in and the pack of whackers were to be applied to the Prime Ministership and it was all supposedly back on track because of his broken promise that is too little, too late tax cuts. Now, forgive me, I don't buy that. And a new poll today shows us that, in fact, what the Prime Minister has touted as the solution to cost of living is not actually connecting with voters. You see, according to the JWS survey that pops up in the Australian Financial Review, the issues that people care about, you can see there, the bigger the blue, the more people care about it. Cost of living in February of 2023 was 47% of people's number one issue. It's still the number one issue, but in February of 2024, after the so-called solution had been delivered, it's up by 11 points. Almost 60% of Australians say it's the number one issue that the federal government needs to be dealing with. Up by 10% are housing and interest rates. Down is hospitals. Down is climate change. Up is the economy. Plus, there's been a spike in border protection, which has now become a priority for, yes, just 13% of the electorate as the number one issue, but still it's up 7 since the survey 12 months ago. What do you think that's because of? The boats that have been turning up, the stories that have been around in the past few days. And interestingly, law and order, an issue that in Queensland is theoretically going to punish the Queensland Labor government. But I just thought this was another piece of data that goes with the data that came out of the Essential poll that said that more than half of all of Australian voters had very little or absolutely no knowledge at all about the too little too late tax cuts, which is my supposition is that when people actually realise how little the effect is, then all of the problems that were there at the end of last year and the start of this year, before they decided to change their mind, is that the federal government is not doing enough when it comes to cost of living. An issue that, rather than, as the professional political people would have you tell, is an issue that is going off the boil, it is in fact increasing. Look at those numbers again. In February of last year, it was 47% of people. It clearly was the most dominant issue over anything else. But now it is almost 6 out of 10 voters. So, may I say, the Prime Minister is not out of the woods on the issue that his government has made plenty of choices to make things worse. And when you've taken $1,500 off 10 million people, giving them $15 back a week is not going to change the picture, no matter how much the press gallery says it does, because they want to preserve the power of their mate. Meantime, of course, last night we showed you the stories about a text message which came from inside the Prime Minister's office suggesting that this was an election year, and that was the reference to a person who used to work for Kevin Rudd, who's now working for the Prime Minister. So we had the conversation about will there or won't there be an election. Now, you do not have to be a genius to understand that nobody knows when there's going to be an election. It is going to be the Prime Minister's decision when the election will be. He will do it at the time that he believes is of the best political choosing. The reason that I say history tells us that the Parliament doesn't go its full term is because most first-term governments don't go the full term. Governments try to increase their majorities, or in the case of John Howard, they're willing to burn parts of their majorities to get a big thing done, which is why we had the conversation that we had last night. I wasn't pretending to be a false prophet about knowing what's inside Albo's head. But for what it's worth, this is what the Prime Minister had to say today after that conversation that, of course, was fuelled by what his own office was telling his own staff.
This is a bit of a beat-up. If you look at the memo that came from my Chief of Staff, it's about someone joining my staff in March. The term ends in May next year.
So, therefore, election year, it is not a calendar year thing, it's a 12 months from when... Come on. Again, it'll be up to the Prime Minister when he thinks the political advantage is there, when he thinks the opposition is at its weakest or his argument is at its strongest. Now, the one absolute giveaway of when there will be an election, be it midway through this year, any time after August, or be it next year, is not about federal budgets, but instead it's going to be about the rules under which the election will be fought. As well, I've told you, this government is actively negotiating to increase the number of senators that will benefit the left-wing crossbench bloc that will help the Prime Minister should he be re-elected, even with a minority government. But certainly it would provide a blocker with more left-wing senators coming from a place like the ACT, should there be a coalition government after the next or the next or the next or the next election after that. But as always, when the Prime Minister promises something, even when he is using a texter to make a point with a former Labor staffer turned journalist who now gets the chance to advocate for the Prime Minister from the journalist's desk, that this is a Prime Minister who told us this.
My word is my bond.
But how many times have we been able to show you that his word ain't worth much? And if the bond was for a rental property, you'd be getting very little of it back. Of course, the first test of how Australians are actually taking the too little too late tax cuts is in the seat of Dunkley. Now, this is a seat where the Labor Party has a 6% margin. This is a seat where the Labor Party, the only reason for the by-election is that a local Labor MP passed away. So the likelihood of this becoming a Liberal victory is relatively unlikely. But if there is some sort of a protest to be registered against the government, the opportunity will be there in the first weekend in March. And showing now that it is a pretty permanent feature of our electoral politics. A lot of people like to vote early. We are a couple of weeks out from that election, but pre-polling has now opened. And more than 3,400 people have already voted. It's about 17% of the electorate, I think. Maybe a little less, but still, it's a significant number of people that have already voted, and they've done so in the first 2 days. 19,000 people have requested a postal vote. Now, this will be important because, remember, postal votes are not counted on the night. So if, for whatever reason, the number was particularly tight on election night, 19,000 postal votes, which would be opened the Monday after and have multiple days to come in afterwards, means that if it is going to be a tight result, then that result may well be going back and forth over a few days' time. So yes, join us, not this, but next Saturday to find out what the numbers actually are on the night. But also, if you would like to join us for a candidate forum, otherwise known in the real world as a pub test, please, next Monday. We've got about half the room full, but I need the rest of the room filled, and I want it filled with the people who watch this show. I want it filled with the people who know people who live in that electorate. I want people from that electorate, not random people from the other side of town. But if you are somebody who would like to join us, next Monday night, February the 26th, for a series of candidates, we put an invitation to all of them. Whether they all turn up or not, that is their own business, but many have been invited, the key ones. Pub test at skynews.com.au to register. Also, tell us what's your question for the candidates. You will have the chance to ask it in person next week. And again, first in, best dressed. Half the room is full. If you would like to join and fill the other half, do it right now. Pub test at skynews.com.au. Dunkley, a potential protest or reaffirmation for the government. We'll all find out together, but let's find out what that room says on Monday of next week. Now, as you know, the boss of Woolies has decided to retire, to resign, to quit. And apparently it had absolutely nothing to do with external forces, such was the spin out of the company today. It had nothing to do with the fact that on Monday night, the CEO was storming out of interviews with the ABC, who were pushing the union line that supermarkets are just more about profit than they are about prices, and prices are too high because the organisations want to make profit. But of course, anyone who walks away from an interview, it's always a bad look. And the idea that he walked away, well, it all resulted, of course, in him now losing the job, walking away from it, retiring. But either way, he's not going to be around for much longer in the job. Now, I've got to say I'm happy he's gone because I didn't like what his company did when it came to Australia Day. Not because of their decision to stock or not stock stuff for Australia Day, but the way in which they paraded their decision. That they were playing for woke points and they were punished by the consumer. So they've been copying it from all angles and the CEO is gone. So good riddance. I hope whoever returns, if they don't bring back the merchandise, at the very least doesn't try to rub people's noses in it and then spends more time celebrating Lunar New Year than our own National Day. But such is the big woke corporates. But speaking about supermarkets, and we know right now that, again, just as they tried with the former Reserve Bank governor, this government is going to, again, try to pretend that they have nothing to do with inflation, nothing at all to do with increased taxes on things like heavy vehicles, which means the products that end up turning up in supermarkets end up costing more money. Nothing at all to do with the cost of employees, nothing to do at all with the transition to renewable energies, which of course has pushed up power prices as we move from the system that works to the one that, fingers crossed, will into the future. So the current pinata is to get the people who were in charge of Grocery Watch under the Rudd and Gillard governments to now be the ones that will be using the bully pulpit to wave their fingers at the supermarkets in the way they used to wave their fingers at Qantas. But then there are the Greens. And the Greens have yet again shown us that they are the party of protest, and there are very small likelihoods that they will ever get into a position where they actually have responsibility. Influence, sure, they got it in the Senate. They'll probably have it after the next election in a minority government. But what about this for an idea in the free market country that is Australia? The Victorian Greens want to pass laws to make sure that supermarket prices are set not by the supermarket, not by the companies that sell their things in supermarkets, but instead by the government. There was press conferences and everything to make this very point, suggesting that how much toilet paper or bread costs should be decided by the government as if it was the 1990s and Soviet Russia. In fact, here they are making the point a bit earlier today in Victoria.
We've got Vegemite, $9.40 spread for some sandwiches, and a block of cheese, $13.90. Frankly, the status quo right now is not good enough. We need governments to take action on this.
Again, the holding up stuff and saying how expensive it is not an argument as to why the state should step in and start setting price controls. But it is a reminder to us about the Greens and the reality of what they bring behind their supposed environmentalism. As I've spoken to you before, I think that this current generation and the next generation of Greens are going to try to use the rental situation in Australia to cover their true want to control free markets. Perfect example, where they are turning around and saying in the Brisbane City Council elections that there should be a 2-year rent freeze and guarantee not $1 increases on rents in any rental property in Brisbane. Now, of course, the reason why rent goes up, apart from the demand for the property, is that the cost of paying off the property, if you are the property investor, has increased. It has increased 13 times since this government came to power. That's what interest rates are. And yes, while there is a tax benefit at the end of the year, in the difference between the money that you get in rent versus what you have to pay off when it comes to a mortgage via negative gearing, the reality is that you've got to have enough money to make it through the 12 months. But the Greens' idea is to just simply say, no, if you own a property and somebody else rents it, you should have to bear more of the cost as the cost of paying off the property increases. Now, these are also the people who believe that everything can be funded by just shaking your nearest monocle-wearing, cigar-chomping, top-hat-wearing billionaire. They want to make sure that billionaires pay a specific rate of tax, and by the way, not just on the money that they make in any one year, but on the assets that they own. They also believe that corporations should pay their fair share of tax, and who would dare disagree with that? But when you actually look at the methodology that they put into that particular statement, it shows that they know less about how economics works than a kid who is studying it at high school today. You see, they want to also introduce a thing called a super profits tax. Now, this theoretically goes after a bank, a supermarket, anything that's earning a particular amount of money. But have a look here. A 40% super profits tax on corporations with more than $100 million turnover in Australia is what they are trying to put in place. Now, automatically you go, $100 million. Paul, what are you talking about here? Well, of course, the difference between turnover and profit is rather significant. Now, again, just to educate the Greens, turnover is every single dollar that goes through the till. But of course, there are expenses that mean income after expenses. The money that's left over is what's profit. Now, for a business that turns over $100 million, they don't make $100 million profit. I can't think of an industry where that would be the case. Instead, it is a percentage of the $100 million that is left over as profit. Now, if the business is listed on the stock market or has shareholders, it is the shareholders through a dividend who are given a portion of the profits. Otherwise, part of the profit is used to expand the business. You don't need to borrow money for a bank if you have cash on hand to be able to build a new warehouse, buy more trucks or hire more people. But in the world of the Greens, there is a scenario where you already pay your corporate tax, you pay your payroll tax, and then just depending on the size of the turnover, you would pay another 40% on top of that. Now again, to the Greens or lefties, they'll all just be nodding their heads and saying thanks for pointing out our policies, but the reality is they are unworkable. But we have seen other political parties, like the Victorian Labor Party, also institute taxes and levies, not on profit, but on turnover. Now this will result in smaller companies, or if they have the ability, companies of that size moving their headquarters to another place in the country, or, sadly, for many companies, they would try to find a way to shift their monies offshore. Too many companies do that. And sure, not enough companies pay the full amount of tax. But the Greens live in this world where they believe in not equality, but they believe in equity, which is that everyone has the same experience at the end of the day, no matter whether you put in no effort or all the effort in the world. Everyone ends up in the same place. Now, 30% of people under the age of 35 plan to vote Green at the next election. There will be people who will vote Green at the next election because they think they're the only political party that is fighting for renters. But I hope people actually understand what the consequences are beyond things like price controls that will never actually come to pass. And again, God forbid if these people end up in a scenario where, as the polls would tell us, the Labor Party heads towards a minority government after the next federal election, and they have control in both the lower and the upper house for the government to do anything, where the Prime Minister would be reduced even further to not making decisions in the interests of the country, but instead just doing stunts to make us look like he understands or cares. A few other things worth mentioning this evening, including a big congratulations to my mate Peter V'landys. Now, Peter V'landys single-handedly, in my view, saved rugby league. As the boss of the Rugby League Commission, he was the one who got them back on the field when everyone else was wringing their hands about COVID. He is the man who plans to expand the game, but I had to say, credit where it's due, which is $700 million in revenue has been made by the National Rugby League in the past 12 months, and more than $100 million of that is profit. See, difference between turnover and profit. But congratulations to Peter V'landys and everyone in rugby league for the strong job they have been doing and the massive financial returns, and all the best for their return to football, which begins in the beautiful city of Las Vegas. Fingers crossed, no troubles, but all of that will pay out on Fox Sports and on KO in the next couple of weeks. Meantime, if like me, you're a Beatles fan, you can never really get enough of the latest documentary on this or the latest book on that. But maybe, just maybe, we're going a bit too far with a plan for not one, not two, but 4 biopics. So these are fictionalised versions of, so not a documentary as such, but real-life events played by actors, similar to Bohemian Rhapsody or those sorts of movies. Well, the bloke who made... he, of course, won an Academy Award for making the film... goodness me, it's blanked my mind. Anyway, I'll come back to it in a moment or two's time. He will turn around and he's going... Sam Mendes, of course, the man who made the film 1917. Well, he is going to be making not 1, not 2, 3, but 4. American Beauty, that's the movie I was thinking about, which is, 4 separate movies about the Beatles. Personally, if you're looking for anything that's interesting about the Beatles, go and find that amazing documentary that Peter Jackson did about the making of Get Back. It is amazing, literally, just seeing the raw footage of 2 blokes tooling around in the background for a song that may well have changed an awful lot of people's lives into the future. And finally, can I just talk again about American politics? As you know, I like to do, but particularly about how the lefty media in the United States, well, they love covering up for Joe Biden. Now, as we know, the cognitively impaired President of the United States, the man who falls over sandbags and somehow is able to challenge gravity by falling up the stairs onto Air Force One, he now can't be trusted to walk up the stairs on Air Force One, so he goes up the small stairs at the back away from cameras. And we all know that when it comes to talking, he ain't that amazing.
And I don't want to, well, maybe choose my words. Anyway, I mean, Putin's kleptocracy, yeah.
Oh, it's so creepy. Well, thanks to the Media Research Centre in the United States, they pulled together all of the times the mainstream media has made you think that what's happening before your very eyes isn't actually happening.
If you're concerned about Joe Biden's age, you probably don't know Joe Biden.
Biden is actually in good shape.
Right. Mentally, he's quite acute.
Any aide who engages with him or reporters, we can see this. The gears of his mind are working.
The right-wing media has so fixated on Biden and Biden purportedly having cognitive issues.
It's not just making an issue of Biden's age. It's lying. It's saying he's senile. It's saying he's demented.
Seriously, how do these people do it? Of course, they do it because they are trying to cover up for the reality of anything that would make you think about not voting for the Democrats and, God forbid, thinking about voting for Donald Trump. Now, as extreme as the things are in the United States, you know that stuff gets echoed back through our politics here. Hence why you saw a scenario where very few people who are paid to talk about politics 24/7, to write about it, to read about it, to talk about it on the radio, talk about it on the television, call out the games of the person that they want to maintain access with, to stay in good with the powers that be. Hence why you don't turn around and point out that the Prime Minister just happened to have a texter to sign the arm of a bloke who used to work for his government, but now plays the role of journalist in Western Australia. Quick break, back with more. No Sooks, no Lefties tonight. Looking forward to this one. Bronwyn Bishop, we know you love her. She's one of your favourites each and every week, as is the delightful Holly Hughes. Back straight after the break. No Sooks, no Lefties. And hopefully I'll be able to remember every movie I wanted to talk about. And we don't have to struggle trying to remember it before you. How embarrassing. More in a sec. Thank you very much for watching. If you're a Swiftie or you're just named Taylor, I'm glad that you're here each and every night. All right, let's get straight into this right now with the wonderful Holly Hughes and Bronwyn Bishop. Holly's in Canberra. Bronwyn spent too much time in Canberra, so she gets to stay in the man cave. Lovely to see you both. By the way, just, often, you've gone toe-to-toe with Nicholas all the time. How good that Nicholas Reece was the casting vote and the Melbourne City Council saying no to that sort of super lefty motion. Particularly, he hated the idea that there was absolutely no condemnation of Hamas. But well done to Nicholas, eh?
Well, didn't I always tell you that Nicholas had really good points in him? That he, ultimately, if he admitted his socialism, he could get over it.
Yeah, correct. That's it, Holly. Maybe we're rubbing off on him. But does that mean
we're rubbing off on him?
Yeah, but does that mean that it is the other way around? Or I apologise for any lefty sentiments that may well be accidentally mentioned. All right, so let's talk about this poll that I mentioned at the start of the show about what matters, what people care about. And I thought that it was deeply instructive that after the lies, the backflips, the spin, the BS and the too little too late when it comes to the tax cuts, the number of people who still say cost of living is going up, not down, up. Compared to where it was 12 months ago. It's almost 6 out of 10 voters now, as opposed to 5 out of 10. The numbers, I think, speak to what we've talked about here, Bronwyn, which was that there's the initial conversation, there's the bubble conversation, as that polling came out of The Guardian that said half of people don't even know about these things. If the Prime Minister thinks he's out of the woods on cost of living, that poll should put him flat on his backside.
Well, the fact of the matter is that every time you fill up at the petrol pump, you know the cost of living is rising. Every time you have to pay a power bill, they know that the Prime Minister lied to them by saying they were going to get a reduction, and that Bowen perpetually lies by saying that all this wind and solar stuff is the cheapest source of power, when we know it's not. So the bottom line is the cost of getting it, all the things that feed in from the cost of both petrol, taxes on heavy vehicles, all those things is what pushes up the price of what you're buying in the supermarket. Now, I saw Vegemite being demonstrated there, and I can tell you I used to pay $5 for the pot of Vegemite I buy. It is now $7.20.
Yeah.
So, but the cost...
He was holding up the biggest possible vat of it that I've ever seen on sale.
I have to tell you, that pot was on sale the other day for just over $9.
There you go.
So, You
So
know,
he was picking a particularly fancy version.
and that was on special. But I'm telling you, it is rising, and I'm one of those people who really does like to see where individual items in the supermarket are going, and furthermore, I like to add it up in my head as I'm going round, so I know what the result should be at the checkout.
So again, Senator, the Prime Minister and the people around him, the press gallery in particular, would suggest that cost of living's last year's issue. I noticed that sort of far left-wing websites are pretending that it's all a News Corp conspiracy, the conversation about cost of living. But this was quite instructive, that a poll taken after all of the announcements, all the spin, all the BS, yet the cost of living pressures continue to go up. Now, again, governments can only change the subject so many times. They will always be drawn back to reality.
And look, all Australians, Bronwyn's right, as they go around the supermarket. I got my power bill this morning and I saw it had come in early and I thought, you know what, I'm just not starting my day this way. I mean, and I'm glad I didn't. It's horrific. So we know he lied to us about reducing power bills. I think what's interesting in those figures as well is the increase, as you pointed out, with regards to national security and border control and management of immigration, and particularly immigration detention, that those issues are starting to come back to the fore. We now know that there's a series of murderers, violent sexual offenders that were released in the cohort, that this Labor government has zero idea where they are. We all hope that there is no incident, but when you look at the pedigree of the people they've released, 25 have already been rearrested. That might hone a few more people's attention into that issue. But also I thought it was interesting, climate change is steadily declining. Now it's still going down each time, just a percentage point, but it is less top of mind issue because we do know that about climate change in Australians. They like to say it's very important to them, but they most certainly do not want to pay for it.
So Woolworths is going to be on the search for a new boss. Again, I reflect on all of this because of his attitude when it comes to Australia Day. I know that's ultimately not the reason why he's now gone from the job. I do think it has something to do with this little moment on Channel 2 the other night. Can we show when he stood up and walked out of an interview? Never a great idea.
Sorry, the former head of the Competition Commission says his words are that we have...
By the way, I shouldn't have said that, Angus. Are we going to leave it in there if we are?
Well, I mean, we're on the record. You said it. I mean, let's move on. But yeah.
Yeah, no, I think I'm done, guys. I do this with good intent. I don't do this with bad intent.
You're walking out, really?
Never a good look. But also, it's a small little detail, but I can't help but sort of tell you how the sausage is made. You notice how the questioning that was of the boss of Woolworths was about what the former Competition Commissioner Alan Fells had to say about price gouging by the supermarkets in terms of prices. Now, that report was put together by the ACTU. They're obviously trying to create a distraction for the government in terms of whom is to blame for what you end up paying at the checkout. Interestingly, and not at all that there's coordination on these things, the report comes out a couple of weeks later, the union people over there at Channel 2 go and ask questions on the behalf of the report that's put together by the unions. I mean, not at all sort of a little show you of how the relationship works and how the circle of interest works together to build narratives. But the CEO is gone. We'll see what happens with them into the future. But also talking about supermarkets, what about the Greens wanting to introduce laws to determine how much a loaf of bread can be sold for in Australia?
Well, the first thing to say is there's no power for the Commonwealth Government to do any such thing. There just is none. I do remember that Whitlam, I think, had a go at it, and of course he too found there was no such power. So it's bluster, but they are truly communists, these people. They're not just... They can wear the C word, the communist word, like that, because I would normally just call them socialists, but I really want to identify their particular version of socialism as communism, because when we go back and look at the history of it, the people who used to line up in queues because there was nothing on the shelves, there was nothing to buy. If a market isn't working, then you're not getting the goods you need. And these Greens, who pretend to be all about conservation and about the environment, are literally the worst possible person we can have in the parliament.
But also, I mean, I was going to say they're economically illiterate, but I do think that their understanding of free markets is a little more similar to a teenager learning about things. That I think that they have a very serious worldview of how economies should work, and that basically those with anything need it redistributed to everyone, so everyone ends up in the same place.
But that's the essence of what Karl Marx wrote. The bottom line is they are communists and they should wear the label.
Well, I'm always interested about people who find the Greens too far to the right, so they end up voting for the Socialist Alliance or anything like that. So I'd love to see an economic debate between those two. But again, Holly, what played out when it comes to Woolworths, I think that not too many people have a great amount of sympathy, firstly because of, if you come from the left, the stuff that was shown on Four Corners on Monday night. If you come from, the centre, then it's the attitude towards Australia Day. But again, as I pointed out about the Greens, these lovely little slogans that everyone's going to sort of agree in the student share house, but look at their methodology, that they want a super profits tax based off turnover, not profit, turnover.
They don't even understand what the terminologies mean. I mean, these guys are true unicorn farmers. They are absolutely economically illiterate. They have no idea what is going on. You know what I'm doing tomorrow? If anyone else would like to waste a day and join me online, we have a duty of care inquiry tomorrow where we have a number of groups coming down to lecture us on the duty of care we have to the next generation around climate change. This is a Greens-led inquiry agreed to by Labor.
Of course.
And I have to spend a day listening to absolutely pathetic arguments, distraction, irrelevance. I mean, it's just lunacy. But this is what these people are about. If they want to talk about prices in the supermarket, let's have a look at the boost in energy prices for manufacturers and why goods are more expensive, what they're doing to farmers at the farm gate and how they're restricting what they can and can do on their own land and how that's then being packaged. Look at all the plastic around that, they don't seem to mind. Then we've also got all the supply channel issues. The trucks, they are putting so much more fuel excise and so many more price imposts onto transport to get from the farm gate or the manufacturing or to the supermarket is costing more and more and more money. All of the things they've done around getting rid of plastic bags that, now you've got to pay 25 cents for a paper bag. All of this costs money and add costs on everywhere else. So if Greens are serious about reducing food costs, they might want to have a look at supply chain costs and why they've gone up so much. But they wouldn't even know what those words meant.
Well, and again, right, I mean, the people watching this show, they get it. I got lots of text messages from people in businesses, big, small and former people in both of those industries, talking about how important it is that people understand the devil that they are dealing with and the fact that 30% of younger voters are thinking about doing it. And I believe their vote goes up at the next election because of their focus on renting. And I think that there are people that are going to embrace an idea that's about better rights for tenants, but what actually comes with it is the capacity in a minority parliament to introduce a whole collection of things from death taxes all the way through to what we're talking about here. And all of that is going to be an absolute wrecking ball for Australia.
Yeah, well, that's why I don't agree with Holly when she says they don't know what they're doing. They do know what they're doing, Holly. That they want to destroy the system that we've got. They really want to destroy.
Bronwyn, if they get in charge, you and I are two of the first ones on the wall. I can tell you that's how they think. I mean, these people are absolutely. I mean, look, I'm not disagreeing with you. I think they're economically illiterate. But whether it is willfully so as their copy of Das Kapital gets another read.
Yeah. I think they know damn well what they're doing. They really do belong to the school of thought that they want to reduce the number of people on the planet. They think that human beings are a pollutant. They don't care how they die, basically, as long as they are. And we'll probably discuss another aspect of that a bit later.
Thank you for the tease. We will, in fact, do so straight after the break. Let's take a quick break now because there is a conversation in the Northern Territory about the right to die legislation, which has been passed in every other state. We're talking about euthanasia here. But wait till I tell you a group of people they would like to include in being able to end their life early. This will annoy. Stick around. We need you for the whole hour. Thank you very much for watching. No sooks, no lefties. That's the way it is this Wednesday night. Thank you very much for watching. Bronwyn Bishop is here along with Senator Holly Hughes. Holly, Prime Minister says, despite the fact that my staff are telling my staff this is an election year, what they really mean is any time in the next 12 months from March. His word is his bond. Yep. Do you believe him that we're going full term?
I don't believe a word this guy says, but I think what he should be more worried about is that messages between his senior staff are starting to leak.
Yeah.
There's got to be some unhappy office people in the PMO for those sorts of messages to be leaking out. So, I mean, we all know first-term governments tend to go a bit early, but at the end of the day, Prime Ministers decide when the election is, and they're going to go when they think they can win it. So, you know, they've got the Queensland election in October this year. They've got the WA election in March next year. Tasmania's now not far away. They might start to see a little bit of that blanket of red slip away across the country. So they might have to hedge their bets. Do they go before those elections? Do they go after them? Do they wait for another budget? But I think Tim Gartrell's probably a little bit more nervous of who decided to spread out the text message he sent.
That's a very good point.
He says a lot more.
Hey, yeah, is the real story buried here? And for those that love their detail, like people who watch this show, which is more important?
Well, I think there will be an early election because he thinks with the rejigged tax policy that people will start getting some money in their bank account. He's got a newly constructed reserve bank who just might see their way clear to having a lessening of interest rates. You might see that he might put another sweetener in the budget in May. And all that stuff isn't going to last till next May, because next May they'll be saying, what have you done for me lately? So he will be going while he feels he's got an opening and a window. And his answer today, when he was asked, will there be an early election? I've always said 3 years is too short.
Yeah, no.
That ain't no.
Yeah, good point. All right. So Northern Territory is putting together its laws with regards to euthanasia. Now, this is passed in all other states. It's the territories that are dealing with it now. And there is a conversation about people with acute mental illness, about whether they should have the right to access that system in the way that people who have terminal illnesses have a right to access that system. Now, Bronwyn, I, as a philosophical point, have always believed that it's your right to do what you want. However, once we start to get into, we move out of terminal illness and we move into mental illness, it's a hard no from me.
Well, Paul, I've always said that euthanasia is a slippery slope. And I've always said that if someone wants to take their own life, that's their business. But what we have now got in this country is authorisation for doctors to kill people. And if you go back to the origin of euthanasia, it was invented by Germany's National Socialist Party, that is Hitler. In 1939, a Dr. Karl Brandt was appointed to kill children who were mentally or physically disabled. Hospitals were told to look out for children born mentally or physically disabled, and up to the age of 3 initially, and told to send them off to these clinics where they were simply killed. Under this policy, they killed 300,000 people. It grew up gradually, it went the other way. It went to 17-year-olds, then up to others. So it's a slippery slope. And understand it was doctors who ran those programs.
But in fairness to the system that exists here, you have to ask for it. You have to be found of safe mind. It's not that, you know, your brother and sister get together and fill out the form for you.
Well, I actually spoke to somebody who's been through the process. They said they have never been through a more gutting process in their life to watch a relative of theirs put to death.
But they made the choice, correct?
The person who was put to death did.
Yes.
But they don't take their own life. They are put to death.
Yes, I understand. But Holly, again, in this scenario...
And it's such a slippery slope. As we said, it was only going to be terminally ill people.
Yeah.
Who says they're terminally ill anyway, and what the length of time that they've got left is? I know people who have got terminal illnesses who fight for every day and love it.
Yes, of course.
So... And the pressure, one of the reasons it was introduced in the first place was that it would cost less. And in this New South Wales government, we have had that government reduce the amount of money spent on palliative care.
Right.
Because, look, there's another option. They can just slip quietly away. It is such a slippery slope, and it is morally to me, indefensible.
So what people are seeing right now is a survey that, as you can see, is being asked by the Northern Territory government, not on the behalf of anyone else. It's the very government that's asking the question whether a person should be able to access voluntary assisted dying if they have a mental condition as their reason for access. Do you agree, disagree, strongly disagree? Holly, how do you view it?
Well, mental conditions by their very nature mean people have cognitive impairments and challenges with their cognitive understanding.
Their ability to say yes or no. Good point.
Yeah, is very, very limited. I've got to say, I sat with my mother for the last week of her life last year after she had had dementia for 9 years. I'm pretty sure my mum didn't want to go out the way she did. I certainly would not want to go down that path. It's horrible, the indignity at the end. You don't know who anybody is. You don't know who you are. It's absolutely awful. And obviously those decisions can't be made if you need to be of sane mind when the disease is quite progressed. But Bronwyn's right when she talks about children with a disability, the eugenics that we saw through Nazi Germany. You know, I've got a kid with autism. He would have been one of the ones that was gone. And it was actually Asperger's, who was one of the German doctors, who took a whole lot of kids with autism into, and forms of it, into clinics, but actually worked with them and saved an awful lot of children's lives. But yeah, it is horrific. And but the fact, I just don't think mental illness comes anywhere near.
Well, and also you saw. I mean, you saw how broad that question was, right? So where the thresholds are and all the rest of it, we'll find out in the next little while. I apologise for the unpleasantness of the subject, but this stuff is all happening in and around our watch. In a week's time, there'll be the South Carolina primary, which Donald Trump will win by a huge margin. Nikki Haley is the former governor of that state. However, she's telling us a week out that there's no plans to pull out ever. Roll the tape.
I feel no need to kiss the ring. I refuse to quit. South Carolina will vote on Saturday, but on Sunday, I'll still be running for president. I'm not going anywhere.
So is this her making a speech today so she doesn't have to give one on Saturday? It seems like that's the plan. What do you reckon, Bronwyn?
Look, she's betting all on finally Trump having to succumb to the attacks on him by the legal attacks.
So Trump gets wiped out and I'm the last one standing.
That's what she wants to be the Stephen Bradbury candidate. I think would be a good way.
Stephen watches this show, by the way, so shout out to Stephen Bradbury.
Oh, I'll shout out to him, but that's what she thinks she can do.
She thinks she can pull a Bradbury but become Prime Minister, President.
But there's obviously a section in the Republican Party who've got a lot of money who just don't want Trump at any price, and they're just determined to keep her in there just to make trouble.
Holly, quick one. How long can she stay on? I mean, basically, we wait until the convention, and if Trump's still, above ground, then that's when she pulls out?
Well, it's interesting you use that phrase because a friend of mine said to me yesterday when we were discussing Nikki Haley and her opportunity or what chance she had, that she is but one cheeseburger potentially away from the nomination. So who knows?
All right. Thank you very much, ladies. I do appreciate it. Do like no sooks, no lefties, but we'll get back to the debate again tomorrow night. Quick break, back with more here on Paul Murray Live. Got a couple of minutes away from the late debate. Thank you very much for watching tonight. Don't forget, highlights of everything's at skynews.com.au. You can send us emails, by the way, to pubtest@skynews.com.au. If you want to join us in Dunkley, we will be doing so on Monday. Here they are, the late debate, fired up, ready to go.